They say family is supposed to be your safe place. The people who love you for who you are, no matter what. But in my case, my family treated me like an invisible stain, something they were embarrassed to acknowledge but couldn't quite scrub out of the picture. I'm Mateo Reyes, 33 years old, and I hadn't been to a family reunion in over a decade. Not by accident. I stopped going on purpose, after years of being the punchline to every joke, the scapegoat for every petty grudge, and the outsider who was never good enough to be invited inside. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the odd one out. My cousins were loud, flashy, always competing over cars, vacations, and Instagram followers. My sister, Camila, was the golden child, prom queen, Ivy League graduate, married to a real estate broker with 3 kids and a golden retriever. My parents, especially my mom, loved parading her around like she was some sort of trophy that validated all their parenting decisions. And me? I was the weird kid who liked books more than basketball, who volunteered at the library instead of sneaking beer into the garage with the other teens. I was the one who fixed the internet when it went down, who helped my aunts fill out online tax forms, but somehow was still treated like the family's live-in tech support/failure. What really got me was how my relatives could twist anything into a dig. When I took a year off after high school to take care of my sick grandfather, the only person in the family who actually treated me like a human being, they all whispered that I was too lazy for college. When I worked nights as a janitor to save up for med school, my Aunt Carmen called me a glorified mop boy. I remember her cackling with a glass of cheap Chardonnay in her hand, telling my mom, "At least my son's in finance, not scrubbing toilets in the ER like Mateo." I was standing 2 feet away when she said it. She didn't even bother to lower her voice. But I never fired back. Not once. I swallowed it. Over and over again. Because I knew something they didn't. I was building something. See, the same year they laughed at me for mopping floors, I got accepted into one of the top pre-med programs in the country. I studied during lunch breaks. I aced my MCATs while living in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, eating instant noodles 6 nights a week. I put myself through med school with scholarships, grants, and pure stubbornness. I didn't post about it. I didn't share graduation photos or announce my residency match on social media. I didn't need to prove anything, not to them. But this year, my cousin Lucas was getting engaged, and the reunion was doubling as a celebration party. And for some reason, maybe a moment of masochism, maybe just plain curiosity, I said yes to the invitation. I booked a ticket back home for the first time in 11 years. My mom sounded stunned when I told her I'd be there. "Oh, well, that's nice," she said, her voice tight like she didn't know how to feel about it. She probably expected me to cancel last minute, like always. I didn't. The event was being held at some rented vineyard outside San Diego. My family always liked to pretend they were richer than they were. The kind of place with string lights, overpriced cheese plates, and an outdoor patio perfect for pretending to be picture perfect. I arrived in a simple charcoal suit. Nothing flashy. No designer sunglasses, no Rolex. Just me. The moment I stepped onto the patio, I saw the same dynamic I remembered. My mom fussing over Camila's kids while Camila accepted compliments like royalty. My uncle Eduardo bragging loudly about some stock tip he gave his neighbor that tripled overnight. And Aunt Carmen, still clutching a wine glass, standing in the middle like she was the queen of the damned place. The air was thick with that strange combination of fake affection and real judgment that only a family gathering can cook up. I didn't even get to say hello before Carmen spotted me. Well, she said, turning to the people around her. "Look who finally decided to show up. Thought you'd gotten lost in a sewer somewhere, Mateo." The group around her chuckled, even though it wasn't funny. She took a sip of her drink and then added with a smirk, "He cleans toilets for a living, you know? Can't believe he even showed up." For a second, I just stood there. I could feel the heat rising in my neck, but I forced a smile. "Hi, Carmen. Good to see you too." I glanced around. "Nice place." She raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Must be a little fancy for you, huh?" Before I could answer, someone stepped up beside me, a tall guy in a slate blue suit with a sharp jawline and nervous eyes. "Hey, you must be Mateo," he said, reaching out his hand. "I'm Jared. I'm, Lucas's fiancé." I shook his hand firmly. "Nice to meet you." He didn't let go right away. His grip tightened just slightly. His brow furrowed. "Wait," he muttered, eyes narrowing. He pulled out his phone and started typing something. Then his eyes widened. Wait, you're Dr. Reyes? Mateo Reyes. The entire patio seemed to pause. Carmen actually froze mid-sip. Jared looked back up at me, his face pale now. You're the guy who led that study on neural inflammation last year. The one that was in the Lancet. You presented at the Berlin Neurology Conference. A quiet gasp came from someone behind me. My sister, maybe. I smiled politely. Yeah, that was me. Jared stared at me like I'd just grown wings. My mentor at Stanford used your work in a case study. Said your paper changed how they approach post-concussion treatment. You're that Dr. Reyes? I gave a small nod. The one and only. Silence. Then someone dropped a fork. Literally. It clinked against a wine glass, and everyone jolted like it was a firecracker. Carmen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her eyes flicked to my suit, then my face, then back to Jared. I thought you were a janitor, she said slowly, as if her brain couldn't quite compute. I turned to her, still calm. I was, and I'm proud of that. No one laughed this time. The smug little smirks disappeared like smoke in the wind. But that was just the spark. What happened next? That was the wildfire. And trust me, it wasn't just Carmen who got burned. The moment passed like a stone sinking in still water, slow, rippling, uncomfortable. Jared blinked, still visibly stunned. My Aunt Carmen, meanwhile, looked like someone had slapped her with a tax audit. She tried to laugh, that breathy, fake chuckle she always used when her ego got bruised. Well, I mean, anyone can be a doctor these days, she muttered, waving a limp hand like it was no big deal. Besides, it's not like you're a real doctor. You don't even do surgeries, right? Jared frowned. He's a neurologist. One of the most respected researchers in his field. Researcher, sure, she said, sniffing. I thought doctors actually saved lives, not sat around writing essays. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence was doing the work for me. Still, it was clear Carmen wasn't going to let go easily. I could already see it behind her eyes, that scramble to reassert dominance, to find some narrative that still kept me below her in her imagined pecking order. She nudged Uncle Eduardo with her elbow, whispering something that made him frown and glance at me sideways. It didn't take long for the whispers to spread. My cousin Isabella avoided eye contact. My mom looked conflicted. She didn't smile, didn't say a word, just sipped her rose and adjusted her sunglasses. Camila, on the other hand, came over with that perfectly measured, I'm pretending to be happy for you, but I actually want to crush your spirit grin. Mateo, she said in that sing-song tone, leaning in for a cheek kiss. Wow, a doctor. Who would have guessed? She chuckled and pulled back. I mean, considering you barely scraped through high school. I graduated summa cum laude, I said calmly. She blinked, caught off guard. Oh, well, that's nice. I got into Stanford for residency. I added, my voice polite. Turned it down for Johns Hopkins. Her smile tightened. You didn't mention any of this to Mom, she said. I didn't think she was interested. I replied, letting the weight of that truth hang in the air. My mom hadn't asked me a real question about my life in over a decade. Not once. Camila tilted her head. Well, I'm glad you're doing well. It's inspiring. She paused, then dropped her voice. But maybe tone it down a bit tonight, okay? This party's about Lucas. There it was, the first attempt to shove me back into my box. I haven't said anything about myself, I said softly. Other people did. Camila raised a perfectly plucked brow. Still, you know how sensitive some people in the family can be. You mean you? She patted my arm like I was a child and walked away. I stood there, watching her drift back to her circle of admirers, laughing a little too loudly as if to reclaim her spotlight. The evening wore on, and the temperature rose. Not just the weather, but the mood. My relatives buzzed with the awkward energy of people who didn't quite know how to act anymore. My accomplishments didn't fit the story they'd built over the years. I wasn't supposed to be the successful one. I was the footnote, the disappointment, the maybe he'll figure it out eventually guy. Now, suddenly, the old hierarchy had cracked. But instead of reevaluating their behavior, they doubled down. At dinner, they stuck me at the far end of the long table, right between cousin Marcos's two toddlers, who threw mashed potatoes at each other while screaming at the top of their lungs. I didn't mind the kids, they were just being kids, but it was clear the placement wasn't random. Camila sat at the center, beside our parents. Carmen and Eduardo took the other end. I was out of the photos. Out of the speeches. When the toast to Lucas and Jared began, I wasn't even handed a glass. Still, I clapped. When dessert came, my mom finally spoke to me. "So, Mateo," she said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin, "are you still renting that place in, where was it?" "Baltimore. I bought a house last year," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "About 10 minutes from campus." "Oh," she said, blinking. "That's unexpected. I've been there almost 7 years." She nodded, then looked past me. "Did you hear about Camila's new kitchen renovation? She's adding marble countertops." "Real marble." I told her it's a smart investment. "Sounds nice," I said. She didn't ask what my kitchen looked like. Jared, bless him, kept trying to loop me into conversations. He asked about my research, about a patient I'd consulted on at a conference he attended. But every time he did, someone else in the family would pivot hard, changing the subject to Camila's kids, or Uncle Eduardo's golf tournament win, or Carmen's vacation photos from Cabo. Later, when the music started and people drifted to the patio again, I stepped outside for air. That's when I overheard them. Carmen's voice first. "He's putting on a show? Doctors don't dress like that. Probably borrowed that suit." "Eduardo, you think he's exaggerating? I bet he just works in a lab somewhere doing busy work. Government grants, or whatever." "Camila, I just don't get why he had to show up now. Like, after all this time. What's he trying to prove?" And then my mother. "I wish he'd told us what he was doing all these years. Maybe we could have helped." Helped? They had ignored my calls, skipped my graduation, and forwarded my birthday cards to the wrong address. I turned and walked back toward the edge of the patio, heels clicking on the flagstones. As I passed a group of cousins, one of them, Diego, chuckled and muttered, "Guess scrubbing toilets pays better than we thought." I paused, turned slowly, and looked at him. "You're still doing that crypto pyramid scheme thing, right?" He frowned. "It's not a pyramid. I read your site's fine print," I said, then walked on. The cracks were growing. But I wasn't there to fight. Not yet. I'd come for a reason. One no one knew about yet. And when it came out, when they saw what I'd really been working on, the look on their faces would be worth every bruise to my pride, every snide comment, every silent dinner. They thought this was the peak. They hadn't seen the summit. The night grew thicker with tension, the kind you could butter like bread. Laughter drifted from the dance floor, but it had a hollow ring to it, like everyone was pretending a little harder than usual. I stood near the bar, sipping a ginger ale, quietly watching the dynamics unfold. My mother was talking animatedly to Camila about a summer internship for one of her kids, probably the same one I tried to recommend to a colleague a year ago and got ghosted for. My name didn't come up once. Jared kept shooting me apologetic looks, clearly aware of the chill in the air. He had no idea what was brewing under the surface. I don't think any of them did, not even me, until that moment. I was about to slip away to my car, just a quiet exit, no drama, when Camila intercepted me near the coat rack inside the main house. Her face was still perfectly arranged, but her eyes had that sharp glint she always got when she was about to cut deep. I knew that look. I'd been on the receiving end of it since we were kids. "Hey," she said, her voice casual. "You're not leaving, are you?" I was thinking about it. She sighed. "I really wish you hadn't come." I blinked. "Excuse me. This night, it's for Lucas. And you've kind of hijacked it. I haven't said anything about myself unless someone asked me directly. Still, you know how this family works. Everything's a comparison. You show up after a decade, and suddenly everyone's whispering about you." "I can't control what they whisper," I said, keeping my voice calm. She folded her arms. "You could have at least warned us. Warned you that I'm not the failure you all assumed I'd be." She winced, just slightly. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is being cut out of this family for trying to survive." She looked over her shoulder, then leaned in. "Look, I'm just asking you. As your sister, please don't make this more uncomfortable than it already is. Go easy tonight." I almost laughed. This family insulted me before I said a word. I think I've been more than easy. Before she could respond, a voice called from the hallway. "Everyone inside, please. We've got a special presentation from the parents of the groom-to-be," someone announced. We walked back into the main room. The lights dimmed slightly, and a projector screen lit up against the far wall. Photos of Lucas and Jared flashed on the screen. Their vacations, their apartment, a few childhood pictures thrown in for sentiment. Everyone clapped and laughed at the right moments. Then the next slide came up, and my heart stopped. There, in bold gold lettering over a photo of a check. The Reyes family contribution to the happy couple, $30,000 toward their dream wedding in Santorini. The room erupted in applause. I stood frozen, my pulse drumming. I didn't give them $30,000, but I did recognize the check, because it had my name on it. The image wasn't zoomed in enough for most people to read the details, but I knew that signature. That check had come from my grant dispersal fund, a highly restricted pool tied to a private medical research endowment I'd been managing for 2 years. Every donation I made through that fund had to be tracked for transparency. I'd given several anonymous donations to various organizations over the years, including one, months ago, to a Reyes family community initiative, which had been pitched to me as a small scholarship pool by my mother. And suddenly, I knew. I turned toward her. She was sitting 2 rows ahead, clapping politely, looking proud, like she deserved the applause. I pushed through the crowd and knelt next to her chair. "You said that donation was for a college access fund." She blinked innocently. "It was. Santorini isn't a college campus." She stiffened. "We thought it would reflect well on you if it came from your office. Lucas's in-laws know people in the foundation world. You used my name to fund a wedding?" She hissed under her breath. "Keep your voice down. This isn't the time." "Actually," I said, standing up, voice rising just enough to draw attention, "this might be exactly the time." My mom's eyes widened. Camila turned from across the room. Jared caught my gaze and looked instantly uneasy. I was trying so hard, not to cause a scene. But then Uncle Eduardo piped up from behind me, clearly drunk, clearly unaware. "Hey, you're the doc who gave the wedding money, right? Carmen said it was your way of buying your way back into the family." And just like that, the oxygen got sucked out of the room. Everyone turned. I looked at Carmen. She didn't even flinch. Just sipped her wine like she hadn't dropped a match into gasoline. I took a deep breath and faced the crowd. "Just to clarify," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "that donation was made under false pretenses. I was told it was for educational access for underprivileged kids, not a luxury wedding package." Carmen scoffed. "Oh, please, don't act like you're some victim. You weren't using that money anyway." "It's not my money," I said, my voice clipped. "It belongs to a medical grant fund, and using it for personal expenses could be considered fraud." There were murmurs now. Lucas looked panicked. Jared was gripping his chair like it was keeping him upright. My mom finally stood, trying to smooth things over. "Mateo, you're overreacting," she said. "It was a family gift. It's not like you're hurting for cash." "That's not the point," I said. "You used my name and a restricted research fund to buy clout, without asking me, without even telling me. And then you bragged about it on a projector screen." Camila stepped in. "This is Lucas's night." "No," I snapped. "This is the night all of you showed me exactly how little I matter to you, except when I'm useful." The room was dead quiet. My heart thudded in my ears. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, I didn't feel small. I felt done. Done trying to earn their approval. Done being the scapegoat. Done being polite while they picked me apart. And that's when I saw it. Jared reaching for his phone again, face pale, eyes locked on something. He turned to Lucas and whispered something. Lucas's face went white. I don't know what Jared saw. Not yet. But I was about to find out. And I had a feeling it was going to change everything. You'd think after that kind of explosion, a public confrontation, a misuse of funds, a family exposed for lying, someone would have taken a step back, apologized, tried to smooth it over. But that's the thing about people like my family. They'd rather bury a truth than confront the shame of it. The music resumed after an awkward delay, softer now, like a background noise to the collective discomfort. A few people retreated outside with their drinks, avoiding eye contact as they whispered behind cocktail napkins. My mother sat down, stiff-backed and silent, as if I'd embarrassed her by reacting to being stolen from. Carmen, unbothered as always, made a show of reapplying her lipstick near the dessert table, still sipping like she was the queen of some broken kingdom. And Camila had vanished, probably into one of the back rooms of the house, to regroup with Lucas and craft some strategy. I stood alone. No one came over. Not even Jared, though I saw him arguing in hushed tones with Lucas near the bar, holding his phone, glancing at me every few seconds like he was working up the courage to say something, but couldn't quite figure out how. So I left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't grab my coat. I walked out the front door into the warm night air, climbed into my rental car, and sat in the driver's seat with the door open, just breathing. The night chirped with crickets and the distant hum of highway traffic. The vineyard lights behind me sparkled like nothing had happened. But something had, and it broke something in me. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying not to let the weight of the evening settle on my chest like a stone. I wasn't angry, not the kind of sharp, explosive fury that burns fast. I was tired, bone deep, soul tired. I had spent years, trying to outgrow their judgment, hoping that if I just kept my head down, stayed quiet, worked hard, eventually they'd see me. Not as the family failure, not as the toilet scrubber, but as a man who had built something real, as someone worth respecting. Instead, they took what I built and used it like a coupon, cashed in on it like it was theirs. I checked my phone. No texts, no missed calls. No one noticed I left. No one cared. And that, more than anything, hurt. I drove to the small hotel I'd booked for the weekend. A modest place, nothing fancy, near the water. I checked in with the night clerk, who barely looked up, then walked into my room and sank onto the edge of the bed, still in my suit. I stared at my reflection in the mirror across the room. The way the tie looked so neat and composed, like it belonged to someone who had it all together. But inside, I felt like a fraud. Not because of what I'd done, but because, deep down, a part of me still wanted their approval. That was the real betrayal. I had told myself I didn't need them, that I didn't care. But tonight proved otherwise. Their words still landed. Their silence still stung. I loosened my tie and rubbed my eyes, exhaustion spreading like ink in water. But even as I slumped there, somewhere deep in that hollow ache, something began to flicker. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. They had shown me who they were. And I had finally seen them without filters, without nostalgia, without the heavy lens of family obligation. The veil had lifted. All the old illusions that maybe, someday, they'd apologize or come around or admit they'd been wrong were gone. I picked up my phone and opened the email archive I hadn't touched in months. There it was, the original proposal my mother had sent. A scanned document requesting a donation to the Reyes Family Opportunity Fund, allegedly registered to support first-gen Latino students pursuing science degrees. No tax ID, no formal nonprofit listed, just a routing number and a handwritten note. Mateo, this would mean the world to your little cousins. Love, Mom. I had wired the donation, assuming, hoping, that for once, my contribution would go towards something good, something real. Instead, it funded a destination wedding for a cousin who once told me I looked like I'd smell like chlorine and ramen. I stared at the email for a long time, then started scrolling. Through my grant fund's transaction history, through copies of signed authorization forms, and then through legal documentation for the foundation I'd built during my fellowship, the one tied to my neurology work. My hands steadied, my mind cleared, and a new idea began to form. Not revenge, not yet. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to protect what I'd built, to reclaim my name from the people who treated it like currency. I opened a private note on my phone and began to type. A timeline. Names. Amounts. Everything. Because the next time they tried to lie about me, or to me, I wouldn't be the quiet, polite version of myself they were used to trampling. I would be the man who no longer let them write my story. The weeks after the reunion passed in a strange, almost surreal calm, like the stillness after a storm, when you're not sure if it's truly over or if something else is still waiting to strike. But no second strike came. Not right away. In fact, I heard nothing from anyone in my family. Not a call. Not a text. Not even one of those passive-aggressive emoji-only messages my mom used to send whenever she wanted to guilt me into doing something. It was silence. And for once, it was exactly what I needed. I poured myself into my work. I had a lecture to give at a conference in Vancouver, followed by a panel appearance at a neuroplasticity symposium in Tokyo. Then a consulting gig with a biotech startup in San Francisco that had been trying to recruit me for a year. I'd kept them at arm's length before, out of loyalty to my current team, but now, I had no more room left for loyalty where it wasn't reciprocated. The new role paid triple, offered full autonomy, and included a private research wing they wanted me to lead. So I took it. I left Baltimore, packed up my little house, and moved into a brownstone in Pacific Heights with views of the bay and enough sunlight to make me believe in hope again. It wasn't flashy, still quiet, still humble, but it was mine. Every corner of it reflected the man I had become, not the boy my family pretended not to see. Every morning, I walked to work past cafes and bookstores, feeling the weight that had lived on my shoulders for years slowly dissolve. There was no one looking over my shoulder, no one questioning my worth, no one dismissing me with a smirk or a joke. Only me, my name, my work, my choices, and people who finally respected them. One afternoon, about 3 months after the reunion, I was invited to deliver a keynote at a global neurology summit in Geneva. My team had recently published a breakthrough on early detection of CTE in athletes, and it was gaining traction fast. What started as a small study done in borrowed lab space now had funding, press, and real impact. The kind of work that mattered. After my presentation, a packed hall, standing ovation, photos with a few grad students who called me their career inspiration. I sat in the green room with a drink, answering a few messages. One in particular made me pause. It was from Jared. "Hey, we haven't talked since that night. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. Lucas and I broke up." I blinked, reread it, then tapped out a reply. "Hope you're okay. That can't have been easy." A minute later, he lied to me. A lot. About your family. About you. I only figured it out after the honeymoon when I went through some of the invoices. The check from the fund wasn't the only thing misappropriated. And just like that, my fingers hovered over the screen, frozen again. Because that word, misappropriated, wasn't a small word. Especially not in the world I now lived in. That night, I couldn't sleep. Jared and I ended up talking on the phone for over 2 hours. He walked me through everything he'd found, from bank transfers under fake nonprofit names, to receipts for donations redirected to personal credit cards, to my own name being used again on emails I had never seen before. Apparently, Lucas and Carmen had been running a web of connections to make themselves appear connected to medical and academic donors, leveraging my reputation for their own social currency, all while mocking me behind my back. I thanked Jared, asked for copies. He sent them immediately, and suddenly, my quiet rise became something more. I wasn't just moving forward. I was stepping into power. Over the next 2 weeks, I built a file. I gathered emails, bank statements, messages, and documents. I consulted quietly with a legal advisor from my biotech firm, not about pressing charges, not yet, but about options, reputation protection, asset tracing, IRS red flags, fraud patterns. Turns out, when your name is tied to federal research grants, your integrity matters. And so does how others use it. I also filed a quiet report with the Office of Inspector General for one of the federal agencies connected to my previous grants. Just a tip, an anonymous concern about funds misused under false pretenses linked to people claiming to represent my work. They took it seriously, very seriously. Still, I didn't speak to my family. I didn't need to. Because while they were still posting filtered photos of Camila's remodeled kitchen and Carmen's rooftop wine nights, I was shaking hands with Nobel laureates and writing grant proposals with budgets in the millions. My new lab published a paper that got picked up by Nature, and I was invited to be on the board of an organization that, ironically, funds real educational opportunities for underprivileged youth, the kind my family used as a cover story for theft. I also started writing. Nothing public, just a memoir. A personal journal of sorts. I called it The Shadow You Carry, after something one of my professors once told me. Everyone carries a shadow. It's how you use it that defines you. Mine had grown with me, but I was no longer afraid of it. One day, I got a message from a former neighbor back home. "Hey Mateo, not sure if you saw, but there was a story on the local news. Something about fraudulent wedding fund donations under federal review. Sounded familiar. Just thought you'd want to know." And that was the moment I realized something else. I hadn't even started my revenge. Not truly. Everything so far had just been me reclaiming what was mine. But now they'd feel what it was like to lose something, to have their story rewritten. And I hadn't even turned the page yet. Power doesn't always come with a title or a spotlight. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in access, in silence, in the right person picking up the phone when you call. And by the time autumn rolled around, I had all of that and more. After the anonymous tip I sent in, the inquiry around the Reyes Family Opportunity Fund picked up traction faster than I expected. Apparently, I wasn't the only donor who'd been misled. An elderly professor from UCLA had also contributed a small grant for STEM outreach. only to later discover that the listed nonprofit didn't exist in the IRS database. The moment he saw the name Reyes connected to it, he filed a formal complaint. His assistant, it turned out, had also seen my name on the website for the fund, the one I didn't know existed, and assumed I was involved. My signature was displayed on the site. A quote I never said. A photo from a conference I'd never given permission to use. It was the spark. By November, federal agents were requesting interviews. The fund, once believed to be a scholarship initiative, was now being investigated as a potential shell used for laundering personal expenses under the guise of philanthropy, including luxury travel, home renovations, and yes, the wedding. And my name was on every page of it. That alone could have ended my career if I hadn't gotten ahead of it. I scheduled a private meeting with my legal counsel and the compliance officer at my biotech firm. We submitted a public clarification, distancing my foundation from the fraudulent activity, complete with documentation, copies of emails, and notarized records proving I'd been misled. The press release was brief but clear. Dr. Mateo Reyes is not affiliated with the Reyes Family Opportunity Fund and has taken legal steps to disassociate from any misrepresentation of his name, reputation, or work. The message was heard loud and clear. And then the real shift happened. One morning, I was sipping coffee in the garden patio of a San Francisco cafe when I got a call from Sofia Calderon, an old colleague from a think tank in D.C., now working as a political advisor for a federal oversight committee. "Mateo," she said, "you've got friends in high places now." I raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" "Depends," she said, amused. "You ever think about serving on an ethics review board? Federal? Possibly." She explained they were looking for someone outside the traditional academic circles. Someone who understood the inner workings of research, but who had also seen firsthand how easy it was for names to be used, twisted, and abused for gain. Someone with credibility. And, let's be honest, a compelling personal story. It wasn't just an offer. It was an opportunity to rewrite the rules, and to do it from the inside. I said yes. 2 months later, I was formally inducted as an advisory consultant for a subcommittee on nonprofit accountability in scientific research. I was no longer just reacting to what had been done to me. I was shaping how things would be done moving forward, quietly, efficiently, with the kind of power that doesn't need noise to be effective. And still, my family had no idea. No clue that I now had access to the people reviewing their case. No idea that the committee assigned to investigate charitable fraud in the Western U.S. had just added another layer of scrutiny to their review, prompted by new evidence I supplied, legally, ethically, through the proper channels. I wasn't manipulating the system. I was the system. Meanwhile, back home, things were starting to crack. Carmen's real estate business had slowed to a crawl after a local paper published a curious article about socialite donors misusing community funds. No names were mentioned, but locals could read between the lines. My mother's weekly wine and charity brunches stopped showing up on Instagram. Camila's husband was suddenly facing tax audits, with several shared accounts flagged for non-disclosed external donations. They tried to pretend it was coincidence, bad luck, bureaucracy, but I knew the truth. They had been using me like a golden goose, leveraging my name and achievements to open doors, get funding, and look important in circles they didn't belong to. And now those same doors were closing, and I hadn't even spoken to them yet. I was still the ghost they thought they could control, still silent, still watching. But behind the scenes, the web I'd spun was tightening. And then came the final puzzle piece. Jared called me again. He sounded nervous, like someone calling from a confession booth. "I didn't tell you everything," he said. I leaned back in my chair. "Go on." I found a shared Dropbox folder. Lucas had saved everything. Notes, emails, voice memos. They were planning a pitch to a tech investor under your name. Like, they literally created a deck that said "in partnership with Dr. Reyes" at the top. I felt my stomach turn, but I didn't speak. "I'm emailing it to you now," Jared continued. "It even has fake quotes. Something about bringing neurological diagnostics into the hands of underserved schools. They wanted to start a fake startup and funnel donations into it. Lucas said you'd never find out." The email hit my inbox as we spoke. It was all there. An entire business venture built on lies. A pitch full of buzzwords they didn't understand, with my face on the front page. Even worse, the draft listed several friends of mine as supposed technical advisors, none of whom had any idea they were being included. I thanked Jared, hung up, and sat in silence for a while. Then I called my lawyer. We had enough now, enough to prove not just theft, but identity fraud, reputational damage, and financial misrepresentation. And I wasn't going to shout it. I was going to show it. Quietly, publicly, legally, one strike at a time. It started, fittingly, with a letter. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not a teary phone call. Just a simple, cream-colored envelope that arrived by certified mail at my mother's house in Escondido. Hand-delivered and signed for by the housekeeper, who, according to a source I won't name, handed it to her while she was outside pruning her roses, still dressed in her Sunday brunch blouse. Inside was a cease and desist. It was worded plainly, but precisely. My legal team had spent days drafting it, every sentence vetted, every comma carrying quiet weight. It laid out the following: that the Reyes Family Opportunity Fund had used my name, likeness, and academic credentials without my consent. That continued use would result in civil litigation. That I had the legal right to demand the return of all donated funds attributed to my identity. And, most importantly, that the matter had already been referred to federal investigators. No bluffs, no threats, just facts, and the understanding that it was only the beginning. That same week, Uncle Eduardo received a similar envelope. So did Aunt Carmen. Camila's husband got one from the IRS directly, a notice of audit related to undisclosed income tied to donor partnerships, flagged under her LLC. They all started calling each other, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. They must have suspected I was involved, but they had no proof. Because I still hadn't spoken a single word to them, I just let the system do the talking. Within days, the website for the Reyes Family Opportunity Fund was pulled offline. Social media pages were deleted. A cached version of the site, which I'd already archived, still lived in the hands of investigators. But the digital facade began to crumble. Then came the blow they never saw coming. The article, a piece dropped in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, written by a journalist I had worked with before on an unrelated medical feature. She'd followed the story after the Compliance Advisory Board flagged it as a case study in reputational exploitation. The headline was clean, professional, and brutal. When family isn't safe, the hidden cost of name misuse in nonprofit fraud. It didn't mention names, but it didn't have to. The article detailed how one researcher's identity had been used to create a fake nonprofit, funneling grant funds into a luxury wedding and other personal expenses. It outlined how easily academic credentials could be manipulated online, how reputations could be weaponized, and how the fallout was spreading through a prominent Southern California family like a crack in glass. The story hit #1 on the site by that evening. 2 days later, an industry watchdog group issued a statement of support, naming me directly and condemning familial manipulation of philanthropic channels. A handful of donors who'd once worked with Carmen quietly severed ties. Her real estate partners pulled out of a joint venture in Encinitas. Her name, once a staple on regional nonprofit boards, was suddenly scrubbed from the websites of 2 major foundations. But the most satisfying moment? That came from Jared. He texted me a screenshot from Camila's private Facebook group, the one she'd used for years to post family photos, passive-aggressive quotes, and humble brags disguised as gratitude. The message, posted by her that morning, read, "Due to recent developments, I've decided to take a step back from social media. Please respect our family's privacy during this time. We are focusing on healing and moving forward." Healing. After years of exclusion, insults, and exploitation, they were the ones asking for healing. I almost felt something. Almost. But then I remembered the look on Carmen's face when she called me a toilet scrubber. The way Camila had tried to shrink me, even when I stood taller than I ever had. The way my mother, my own mother, had nodded and smiled through it all, only speaking up when it threatened her image. So no, I didn't feel sorry. I felt clean. And I wasn't done. A week later, I donated $50,000, anonymously, to a legitimate fund for first-generation Latino students in California. I worked with them directly, advising on how to properly structure their grant applications and build visibility without exploiting any names. They asked me to give a speech at their annual gala. I agreed, but I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about resilience, about how family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when no one else does, about how silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And when the night ended and people clapped, not one of them knew the full story. Not one of them needed to. Because revenge, when done right, doesn't need applause. Just results. And I had them. The fallout was slow, not explosive, but suffocating. Like a leak in a tire that no one noticed until the car was skidding on rims. One by one, the pillars my family leaned on for their reputations began to buckle. Aunt Carmen was the first to publicly crack. Her brokerage quietly dissolved after her two largest clients, both longtime philanthropic donors, pulled their listings. Turns out they weren't comfortable being associated with someone under ethical review. She tried to pivot into social media consulting next, but a few screenshots from the investigation kept surfacing in the comments, and the algorithm didn't forgive. Camila fared worse. Her husband, already under pressure from the IRS, was hit with a $40,000 penalty for unreported funds. In the audit findings, it turned out some of the donations were being redirected to an offshore account under her maiden name. They weren't criminal charges, not yet, but enough to make them liquidate their second property and pull their kids from private school. I heard from Jared that she'd begged their church friends for help with tuition. My mother didn't speak to me at all, not even when investigators reached out to her for questioning. Not when the church quietly removed her from the planning committee for the community food drive. Not even when her neighborhood newsletter ran a little blurb about the importance of transparency in family-led foundations, with a suspiciously familiar story attached. But what hurt her most wasn't the public embarrassment. It was that I didn't show up. When my cousin gave birth, I wasn't invited. When Thanksgiving came, I sent nothing. When Christmas rolled around, I declined the card she sent late, unopened, with "We miss you. Love, Mom," scribbled in shaky handwriting that once meant everything to me. I didn't miss them. Not anymore. Instead, I spent the holidays with my new community, friends, mentors, and colleagues who had become more family to me than blood ever had. We toasted to the year's victories, big and small. We celebrated new research grants and new beginnings. There were no backhanded compliments. No manipulation masked as love. Just peace. Earned peace. And then, in late January, I received one final message. A handwritten letter from my mother. The envelope had no return address. "Mateo, we didn't know what we were doing. We thought we deserved a piece of you. Because we made you. Because we felt entitled. I see now how wrong that was. I know you won't forgive me. I wouldn't if I were you. But I needed you to know. I'm sorry. For everything. I really am. Love, Mom." I folded the letter neatly, placed it in a drawer, and closed it without another thought. Because she was wrong. They didn't make me. They just left me. And I made myself.